Okay, we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Erin Haldine, and I am the CFFS Policy Lead in the Disability Services Division at DHS. And thanks for joining us for another lead agency office hours. So we'll have the same format as we've had in the past. We'll go through some CFFS updates, questions and answers that were submitted in advance, and then review some of our training and resources. One thing that I did want to let everyone know about is if you were on the call last time, you'll remember that we went through some different scenarios and specifically reviewed the service delivery plan and the 6893W. And so we didn't get to a lot of the questions that were submitted for the last time we met. And so today's presentation, there are quite a few slides because we included all the questions that were submitted last time that we didn't get to, plus all of the questions for this particular week. And so I'll try to go as slow as I can. So everything, so you can hear everything clearly, but then I'm also going to try to get through all the slides. So these first few slides I might buzz through quickly because they're kind of repeats of what we've done at previous meetings, but I'll slow down once we get to the new questions. Okay, so if you don't see a question that was submitted, know that we might be doing a little bit of research still, or maybe it's something that we've already answered on our FAQ page. I think we got to every question that was submitted this week. There might have been one that we were still researching. So hopefully you'll see all of your questions answered today. If you want to go back and review some of our old presentations or look at some of our old PowerPoints, those are available on our DSD training archives page. So you can go ahead and review that. This slide is outdated. This picture itself, the DSD training archive, I believe, is current as of today. And so we'll post this presentation likely sometime next week. But you can go ahead and look at all the previous office hours if you'd like to. This is our authorization process for a person from the time that they get assessed all the way to the time that you as the lead agency is entering the service authorization. So if you want to familiarize yourself, or maybe if there's new people at your lead agency and they're unfamiliar with this, just go ahead and look at one of those old presentations and you can click on this link here and it will walk you through each of the different steps along the way. Just a friendly reminder that we have these resources available for you, our CFFS policy manual, some different videos and trainings on the transition from PCA to CSG. We have our frequently asked questions webpage, and then as well as our MMIS manual. And then some trainings. We have our CFFS timelines video, so when people are transitioning. And then we have of course, our within TrainLink, we have the lead agency training and the MMIS training. So we encourage you to go ahead and do that if you have not already. And then just a quick little webinar on the transition from CSG to CFFS. And then we have our e-list announcements, and I apologize, I think this should have a date from this week rather than the last time we met. I apologize, I forgot to change the date, but I'm going to go ahead and direct you to take a look at those e-lists on your own just to make sure that we have enough time to get through all of the slides today, and then review the FAQ page if you have not already. Okay, so I just wanted to review this since we did have a lot of questions that came in over the last couple presentations regarding targeted case managers and if they can authorize and approve plans. So if someone is only a targeted case manager, they cannot authorize and approve the service delivery plan. But we understand that a lot of those individuals are also waiver case managers. And so if someone is both a waiver case manager and a Rule 185 case manager, they then are able to approve that service delivery plan. Okay, so people, in other words, people just need to meet those requirements of a waiver case manager or a certified assessor to approve the plans. Okay, we're going to jump ahead to the questions that were submitted for this week. So a transition from personal care assistance or PCA to the consumer support grant. So there's a question regarding our lead agency staff and the ability to enter additional PCA or CSG to avoid gaps in service. So this is new information for you guys. So hopefully everyone's paying attention. There will be an e-list that is going to be sent out next Tuesday. So we're just telling you guys this in advance so you can make sure you're watching for that e-list and so you know this is coming. We understand that CFFS started on October 1st. And so the people who have received that 6-month extension, that is going to expire here on April 1st. And we heard you and we heard from people and providers that some of those individuals are not yet through consultation services for various reasons. And so we wanted to announce to everybody that those individuals can receive another 6-month extension of their current PCA or CSG service. Okay. So that, like I said, that e-list is going to come out next Tuesday on March 25th. And it will likely direct you to a policy page, but in a nutshell, this is the information. So lead agencies can enter it needs to be a new PCA Type B service agreement for a person with an existing 6-month PCA Type B service agreement for an assessment that was conducted after October 1st. And the person needs to meet both of the following criteria. So the person's service agreement will end within the next 2 months or less. And that the county or tribal nation determines that the person is likely going to require additional time, okay, to make that transition. Okay, so they have to have both of those. So we're not going to go in and automatically adjust all of the service agreements like DHS did last time when we extended to 6 months. You as lead agencies will need to determine who needs an extension, and then you'll go in and you'll enter a new service agreement for those individuals. Okay. And then the last bullet here, for people currently using PCA or CSG who have not yet had a service agreement or an assessment since October 1st, you're going to continue with just entering that 6-month PCA or CSG service agreement. Okay, so I'm going to say that again. So for people who currently have an extension, they will be allowed to have another 6-month extension. So that will be a new service agreement for people who are on Type B. For a waiver, that's going to be a new line in their service agreement. For people who have not yet had an assessment and they're just still going off their reassessment from last year, when it becomes their reassessment time, you're going to start by giving them 6 months of PCA or CSG, just like you are today for people. And then if they need another 6 months after that, then we'll authorize another 6 months. Okay. One thing that's going to be really important for you to note for all of your individuals, whether you're talking with them or for you as a lead agency to understand, is that we will not be able to extend it past that 6-month time, because at that point, someone will have received a full year of PCA or CSG. So this is really the last extension that we can do to get everyone enrolled in CFFS. So I'm going to pause for a second and just check with my colleagues to see if there's anything in the chat or anything that you think in addition that needs to be said.
Hey, Erin, there's a couple of questions in chat. One of them is about some interactions with an MCO recipient. So we're going to have to put that, have special needs purchasing address that. There is a question about can't find providers. And I don't know, I think we do talk about where enrollment for provider agencies is later in this presentation.
Yeah. I'm not sure if there's a slide today for that.
Okay.
So I'll just say I don't have the exact number, but I know we're right around about 600 providers are now enrolled, if I'm remembering from our last meeting that we had this week. So it might just be slightly under 600, but very close. And we're thinking that there's about 900 or so providers that need to enroll in total. And so we're, well over half there. So we're close to about 600 providers. So there should be no reason that a provider can't enroll within these additional 6 months. We don't think there's a reason.
We might be optimists, but
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
I think there is a question about doing a new support plan for the second 6-month period, and I assume that the question about support plan is about min choices. And so we can't necessarily answer that piece, but I will tell you the reason why we're asking for type B agreements for you to enter a new type B is to avoid some of the edits that would be coming up, and you won't be able to change anything on existing type Bs. So putting in a new one will avoid a lot of edits, and you'll be able to approve it.
Okay. So I'll go on to some additional slides. So I need to reiterate some of what we just talked about, but will the lead agency need to update the support plans for those who are currently on PCA and CSG if their transition is extended beyond 6 months? So the answer to that is yes. Okay. Must the MCO email DHS a PCA extension request beyond 6 months? Or can the MCO approve the extension authorizations? So no, MCOs do not need to email DHS. And then the MCO is going to determine if that extension can be approved. Okay, so just they'll follow the same process as far as lead agencies, where you're going to determine if someone needs another 6 months and then complete that authorization. So how many additional months can PCA or CSG be extended beyond the current 6-month extension that they have? So the answer to that is in another 6 months. So I'll just reiterate what I said a minute ago. So we will not be able to do another extension past this. So at that point, a person has been authorized for an additional 12 months of CSG or PCA, and we won't be able to do another extension past that time. Okay. And then the last question for this section is, can the lead agency backdate a CFFS service authorization? And the answer to that is no. So we're getting a lot of feedback from FMS providers and from CFFS provider agencies that they are getting service agreements, say mid-month, and the service agreement for CFFS is starting like on the first of the month. And we have to make sure that you as lead agencies are working with those providers to confirm a date that the person can make that transition from PCA or CSG to CFFS. So even though a person may already be receiving maybe say PCA services through a provider agency, and they're just going to transition to CFFS, and you may be thinking, well, it's fine, they're already with that same provider, we can just start them at the beginning of the month. CFFS is considered a new service. And so that provider agency or that FMS, they have work that they have to do to transition all of those workers over to CFFS, as well as the person. So they have to redo a lot of their intake paperwork. They have to make sure that those employees are coded correctly with background studies and UMPI numbers. And there's just a lot of pieces of the puzzle that they have to do on their end. And so when they receive a service agreement, let's say today, for an example, on March 31st, that backdated the service start date to March 1st, they now have 21 days where they were out of compliance for those workers to work, or that person hasn't yet transitioned to CFFS. And so we need to make sure that you're not backdating a service agreement if you are entering one, and that you're really talking to the provider to determine the start date or when that transition can occur. Okay, so next section is on eligibility and assessments. So does the lead agency send them in choices assessment summary with a notice of CFFS eligibility? And I wanted to review this slide from last time, because last time we had the word letter included on the slide. And I think the word letter kind of it made people a little worried because it's not technically in the form of a letter. So I apologize for including that word. So it's really just sending the CFFS eligibility, and that needs to be completed within 10 days of the assessment. And then within 60 days, you'll need to send that assessment summary. Okay. They don't need to be sent at the same time. So this is the information that we got from our MinChoices team. And if you're feeling like something might be off about that, we'll just direct you to talk to your MinChoices mentor. Okay, and then what documents must the lead agency send to the CFFS providers? So you want to make sure you're sending the MinChoices support plan, the MinChoices supplemental summary charts, the CFFS service delivery plan, and of course the service agreement is generated in minutes. Okay, the next section is regarding the consumer support grant. And can a person using CSG transition to PCA during the 6-month transition? So yes, the person can if they're currently using CSG, or maybe they're currently using PCA and they want to transition to the other program. So the opposite, they want to transition to CSG or PCA during that 6-month period of time. They are able to do that. And this is a change from previous guidance that we had given. And so our FAQ page is going to be updated to reflect this change. I don't think that's been updated yet, but it will be. So the next section is regarding consultation services. Do lead agencies need to notify consultation service providers of active service agreements outside of sending the service agreement? So do they need to notify them by mail, phone, fax, some other way? So no, the lead agency does not. Lead agency should confirm with the person that the consultation services provider is able to work with them, because we certainly don't want you to authorize the service agreement if that consultation service provider is not able to serve the person. But you don't need to contact the consultation service provider and confirm or give them, some sort of notification that you've put in a service agreement. They will be able to see that on their own. Is there a list of consultation service providers who are not accepting new referrals? So no, we don't have a list. We only have been notified by one provider that they're not accepting referrals. And so all other providers should be. And just because the information can change from day to day, we don't want to put up that provider's name on the screen here for everybody. So there is only one provider out there who said that they're not currently accepting referrals. Do consultation service providers know that they cannot also be the person CFFS provider agency or the FMS provider? And is this in writing? So yes, they do know this. We've reviewed it many, many times with all different provider groups. Provider organizations although they can provide multiple types of service, they can't provide more than one service to the same person. And for consultation service providers in particular, that is listed on the consultation services page of the CFFS manual. It's also listed on the FMS provider page, and it's also listed on the CFFS provider agency page. So how are consultation service providers contacting people? They are most likely contacting people by phone, an email, or a referral form. Or whatever information is listed on the referral form if they have one. So whatever way the person indicated on that referral form. They typically are not sending a letter to the person in the mail. So how long is consultation services available to a person without a plan being submitted? So once a person's determined eligible for CFFS, they can work with the consultation service provider really until their plan is complete. So for some people they might be able to complete that plan right away. For others, that might take them a couple months. So once the plan's approved, course, then the lead agency can enter the other CFFS lines, so the personal care line or goods and services, etc. And then a notice of action is not issued if the person has chosen a provider. Okay, so there may be a time where you may be thinking you've only entered a consultation services line and that the person, they haven't actually started CFFS. They may be working with their consultation service provider for a couple months to get that plan complete. Okay, our next section is regarding covered goods and services. So can a good or service, the example the person was asking about with this question was regarding a shower installation, be approved if it replaces human assistance? And if so, does the person need to choose the agency model or the budget model? So a covered good or service is one that replaces the need for human assistance. So in the example that the person had emailed us was regarding a shower installation because a person would be able to independently take a shower. They wouldn't need a staff person at their home if they had a walk-in shower. So that is something in that particular scenario for that particular person could be a covered good or service. That doesn't mean that a shower installation is going to be approved for everybody. But in this situation, that allowed the person to then take a shower independently, and they did not need a staff person at their home to do that. So if for goods and if someone has an approved good or service in their plan, the person can choose either model, so either the agency model or the budget model. It's important just that the consultation services provider discuss the effects of the budget or the units available for the person and how that affects their personal care. So in this particular example that we're thinking of regarding a shower installation, that is likely going to cost several $1,000s. So that's a really big amount of money that would be, taken away from personal care. And we just need to make sure that that person's personal care needs are also being met if they're using such a large sum of money for a covered good or service. Okay, the next section is regarding the service delivery plan. So do both the guardian and the participant representative need to sign the 6893P if they are different people? So no, they do not. Only the participant representative needs to sign the service delivery plan. Does the consultation services provider complete the individual abuse prevention plan and worker training and development sections of the service delivery plan? So no, they do not. Those two sections in particular, the individual abuse prevention plan and worker training and development, those are completed by the CFFS provider agency. And so you may be receiving plans with those sections left blank, and that's okay. You can still approve the plan. You give a copy to the provider agency, then they work with the person to develop the rest of that plan. So they're going to be developing that IAPP and the worker training and development sections. Now, if a consultation service provider did complete those sections of the plan, that is fine too. You can still approve the plan. Once it gets to the provider agency, they've also received kind of this language or this training that they should be reviewing that plan and making sure that whatever was written in the plan is accurate, and then they should be adjusting or adding to it if they need to. And they do not need to send it back to the lead agency for further approval. So does the lead agency need to sign both the 6893P or the service delivery plan and the 6893W, which is the addendum? No, you don't need to sign both. The lead agency only needs to sign the 6893W. All right, the next section is regarding CFFS on a waiver or alternative care. Right. Can you explain the process for ending a waiver if a person chooses to access CFFS only? Can counties authorize 6 months of PCA while a client completes the service delivery plan? So First thing is you'll want to ensure that state plan services can meet the person's needs. So you don't want to end the waiver for somebody if state plan can't meet the person's needs, of course. The next step is you're going to add a consultation services line to the person's current service agreement so they can start working with consultation and developing their service delivery plan. Next, of course, like I just said, the person and consultation service provider are going to develop that service delivery plan. And then once the plan is approved and the providers are chosen and ready to provide services, the person can then end the waiver and switch to CFFS. Okay, so you just want to make sure that everything is in place before that waiver ends. Do waiver case managers authorize the maximum amount that people are eligible for, or do they only authorize what the person will use? So for CFFS, you always authorize the maximum amount. Okay, the next section is on MMIS. Why do lead agencies need to deny the service agreement line when entering the no pay code? Because the person has not chosen a provider within 60 days. And then just a comment of that with PCA, the lead agency could leave the no pay code in for the entire year without having to deny. So denying the line generates, with the reason code 517, what that does is that generates a service agreement letter to the person that includes language telling them that they need to provide that they need to find a provider. Okay, so that letting them know that services are denied because they don't have a provider yet. And then once that provider is chosen, then of course services can begin. Okay, without denying the line, the person doesn't get a letter. So that's why it's important to go in and to deny the line. Okay, so the FAQ states that we should use the 6893K for changes after 60 days. However, this person understood that it's actually the 6893I. So they are correct. Lead agencies are supposed to submit the 6893I, and provider organizations are submitting the 6893K. So we did find that error within the FAQs, and we'll work on getting that updated. Is there a discussion of giving lead agencies longer than 60 days to go in and edit the service agreement? So no, they're not at this time. That's not something that we're able to change. Our lead agencies, are they still supposed to enter a new CFFS service agreement in the PCA1 security access area of MMIS? And yes, you are still using that same access area. Can consultation service providers be entered in the services that support me section of Min Choices? So the service is added to the service agreement. And yes, you guys can do that. That's where you can enter the consultation services providers. So that's actually been enabled in Min Choices since January of this year. And if you have questions on how to do that, please contact your Min Choices. Oh, I'm sorry, I put support plan mentor. I just meant your Min Choices mentor. I'll get that slide corrected. Sorry for the typo. All right, this next section is regarding the budget model. How do lead agencies ensure that they're approving the correct hourly wage under the budget model? So first, it's important to know that the person in the budget model is considered the employer, and so they're setting the wage for their workers. The FMS is really responsible for ensuring that the wages that are set are following all of the rules of the SEIU bargaining agreement and the tiered wage policies. If those wages are incorrect, the FMS is going to adjust the wage and they're going to bill that personal care or the T1019 line. They're going to bill that correctly. So they're going to bill whatever the correct wage is. They're going to obviously make payment to the worker correctly and then bill for that, bill for the correct wage. So with that, the lead agency really doesn't have to worry about approving a correct hourly wage. And you also don't need to approve if overtime is allowed for the person. That is all going to be managed by the FMS provider. How in depth do lead agencies need to be with reviewing the budget model worker budget? So there's if you're familiar with what the service delivery plan looks like, there is the little budget worksheet. It's kind of a grid within the service delivery plan. And you obviously you want to ensure that all the fields are complete. You want to make sure that they're not leaving anything blank. But the FMS provider is really responsible to review those the rate of pay that's entered, and then make sure that the taxes and benefits are correct, and kind of reviewing those calculations. So we did hear from FMS providers. Actually, we had a meeting with them this morning, and sometimes those are wrong. And so they have been told that they need to go back to the consultation services provider. If the calculation is incorrect and a new service agreement adjustment needs to be made. If the service agreement adjustment doesn't need to be made, then they won't need to work with a consultation services provider for a revision. But they're watching for that and double checking those calculations. So the next section is regarding serving as multiple providers. So is there a list of agencies for CFFS, consultation services, FMS providers that have conflicts of interest? So no, there's not. Like I said a few slides ago, there are many organizations who serve as both a CFFS agency provider, consultation service provider, and an FMS provider. And we understand that sometimes it's tricky because they may all have the same name, but they may have different names for each of their the type of services that they provide. But we don't have a list of who those groups are. They are responsible to disclose that information when they're starting services with a person. And they also know that they cannot provide more than one service to the same individual. So can an agency who completes a CFFS or PSA or PCA assessment also be the consultation services provider or the provider agency? So no. So if there's like a contracted case management company or something that's doing that assessment, they cannot also provide consultation services or be the provider agency for that person. Who is responsible for ensuring there is not a conflict of interest in providers, and how does the lead agency report if there is suspected conflict of interest? So like I said, providers are required to disclose indirect or direct financial interest to the person in writing. The lead agency and the provider should work together to avoid any conflict of interest. Okay, so if you happen to know, or if you suspect that there is some sort of conflict or interest, or they have dual ownership, just go back to the provider and ask that question and let them know that they can't provide both services. And then, it's of course your responsibility as a lead agency to review that when you're entering the service agreement, because we don't want to have a service agreement generated for both provider types if they are indeed the same provider. Okay. And of course, if you suspect that there's a conflict of interest and you've reached out to the provider and expressed that concern, and they're for some reason saying there is not a conflict, and you believe there is, you could just send us an email and we can look into it further. But just first start by going to the provider and having that conversation. Spouses and parents of minors providing services. So can a person have two participant representatives that take turns being the participant representative and the worker? So no, they cannot do that. So they can't have like one parent work in the morning and the other parents, the rep during that time, and then switch and have, the next day or that afternoon, have switch roles. So no, that needs to remain consistent. So the participant representative, as you know, cannot also serve as the worker for the person. Okay, the next section is regarding worker training and development. So do the funds for worker training and development come out of the person's personal care service budget? So they do not. And we thought we'd just share this grid because it seems kind of maybe an easy way for you to visualize it. And I'll talk through it as well. So within the person's service budget is personal care, the FMS fees, as well as any goods, PERS, or any additional services the person may have. What does not come out of their budget is consultation and worker training and development. So can DHS provide examples of why a person would need additional worker training and development funds? So these are just some examples, but the CFFS provider agency, we'll start with talking about them. They may need additional funds. Most common reason is because a person has several workers or they have a change in their workers throughout the year. And so the worker training and development line, I'm going off of memory. I think it's about $1,328. I might be off a little bit, but it's close to that. So a provider may use all of those funds as they're training workers, or if somebody has a change in their workers or their workers, they go through their workers quickly, or they hire a lot of new workers throughout the year. Remembering that the CFFS provider agency, they're really responsible for training all of those workers and the supervision of all of those workers, plus the supervision of the services for the individual. So they might run out of those worker training and development funds and need to request more. Another is there's just high training needs. Maybe the person wants to send their worker or workers to a class. Maybe the person has increased supervision needs, or they're conducting a lot of worker evaluations or the evaluation of the services throughout the year. Okay. The most common reason you would see it from an FMS provider is that the person chooses to send their worker to classes, multiple classes, or maybe they have many workers that they all want to take the same class. So if there is a request to add additional worker training and development funds, you can go ahead and approve that as a lead agency. Okay, so just some other topics that came through. Do lead agencies need to update the shared care to no if the individual does not request shared services? So no, you don't need to do anything. There's no change. It's automatically on every service agreement. And that's just so we don't have to go back and change it and go back and forth throughout the year. So there's nothing you need to do. It's always automatically going to be included on all of the service agreements. Excuse me. Can you provide clarification on how we'll address potential gaps in services after CFFS implementation has been completed? So ideally, there in this scenario I'm giving here, this would be the best way to avoid a gap in service. We understand that it doesn't always happen exactly this way, but the idea is that if this timeline is followed, there would not be a gap in service. So first, the FMS or the CFFS provider agency is going to submit the 6893B, so the request for reassessment, 60 days prior to the end of the current service agreement. Then the lead agency is going to complete that reassessment between day 60 and day 30. Consultation service provider and the person are going to develop the service delivery plan then between day 30 and day 0. And then the lead agency is going to approve the service delivery plan prior to the end of the current service agreement. Okay, so just a reminder that if that service delivery plan is developed late, that's when you'll see a gap in services. Okay, so we recognize right now that this first year has been quite a challenge. We know that there's kind of a bottleneck with the consultation services providers, or really that all of the providers are adjusting or making changes to their systems and their policies to transition to CFFS. But we anticipate that once everybody has rolled into CFFS, a lot of these kind of hiccups or bottlenecks that we're running into will slowly go away, and that that people can follow this timeline that we've laid out on the screen going forward. Okay, most of the time people are going to stay with their same provider, or those workers are already enrolled for services to provide services at that particular provider. And so there shouldn't be this long delay that we're experiencing now. Does the assessor need to enter a CFFS service agreement or MinChoices support plan if a person's in a facility at the time of their MinChoices assessment and is just discharging to a CRS and opening to a waiver? So no, in that particular scenario, no, you don't need to enter a service agreement. Is CFFS an excluded time service? No, it is not. Should we use a provider's NPI or their UMPI if there are duplicates on the CFFS agency NPI list? So if you recall, our regional resource specialists are sending out the the CFFS agency list. I think about monthly they're sending it out, and we understand that there are some duplicates on that page. So you'll want to make sure that you're using the NPI number. That's the number that you're going to be entering. You're not going to enter the UMPI number. Okay, and I think there were a couple of spreadsheets originally that we had sent out where we removed the duplicates, and that actually caused some issues for people. And so we've just decided to keep the duplicates on the page, and then know that you need to enter the NPI. Okay, or you can look up the information at MMIS if you'd like to. Okay, and then the last slide is, must the service delivery plan be revised if the consultation services provider did not include the cost of the background study in the plan? So no, the service delivery plan does not need to be revised by the consultation services provider. So if it's a failed background study, the FMS is going to submit the 6893K to have that added to their service agreement. And if it's a background study that's cleared, the FMS they need to bill the cost of that cleared or passed background study as an employer cost, and that's billed on the T1019 line. So FMS providers know how to do this. They understand that there's a difference between the failed and the cleared background study, and that consultation does not need to revise the plan. Okay. So those are all of the slides for today. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a look at the chat, but I'm also going to turn it over to my colleagues who have been maybe watching it more closely and seeing if there's anything that they want to start discussing.
So Erin, I'll just start with the shared care justification. So I will, it's Janine. I will say that the shared care indicator in PCA land became quite a bunch of work for our SASD group that does the MMIS piece. Because if it wasn't checked, they would have to call the assessor or the case manager and say, is that okay? And things like that. And so when you're thinking about shared care for a person, when you're the assessor, you know that person. You don't know the other people that they'd be sharing services with. You don't know the worker. And so as a prior QP, There would be workers that I thought would be great to do that and other workers not. So what we're trying to do is alleviate some work for SASD as well as some work for you, and having to constantly be called back to say, can this person have shared if you didn't check it? That is the reason that we put shared as automatic in the assessment and in the service agreement, rather. Because it's often a situation that, as an assessor, made me nervous to say yes or no, because I didn't know the worker, I didn't know the other people that would be sharing services. So, and as we were talking with assessors, we heard that most people didn't really have a good example of why they would say no, other than a person being complex. But then again, you don't know the worker and you don't know the other people they're sharing care with. So that's the reason why we actually put it to automatic for shared care. I can actually answer as well the earlier question about MCO and sending over the, is it the 5841? So one thing, just to note, that the 5841 changed, I think in October maybe, and special needs purchasing is asking all lead agencies to make sure that they have the correct one, because we've gotten some questions about things not being able to be on the form, and the form was actually updated to allow for CFFS information. So be sure you're using the new one. Our special needs purchasing person said, yes, so when you're setting up CFFS and the person needs consultation, none of those other decisions have been made. So you would send over that document with consultation for authorization. And then once the other decisions are made, you would send another form over to say these are the ongoing services the person has chosen.
I just wanted to put this, one of the first slides that we reviewed, back up on the screen and address a couple comments that I saw that hopefully we can provide some clarification on. So this here is new information that's going to be published next Tuesday. So we're updating our policy manual. We're putting out an e-list that will all be changed next Tuesday. So we just wanted to give you this information in advance regarding the additional 6-month extension. So we know that at the last meeting that we had 2 weeks ago, we had directed lead agencies to submit the 4292 to DHS with explanation on why someone might need some additional months past that 6-month time. So that direction has now changed. So I know that's confusing because just 2 weeks ago we had one process. After looking into it further and hearing from more people, we thought it would be best to just allow that 6-month extension for whoever needed it. And DHS does not need to be notified. So you don't need to submit the 4292 to us anymore. Instead, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be entering another 6-month service agreement for the state plan. And then you're going to be adding that additional line if the person is waiver. So I'll leave this page up on the screen just in case you, I don't know, want to take a picture or write it down or something. But know that that will be coming out in an e-list next week as well.
So Erin, there's a question again about when plans are approved and how long it takes them to get into MMIS. And so I think what we're really just saying is that you need to have a conversation with the provider so the provider knows and can say, yes, we'll be ready for that date, or no, that can't be the date that we can start. So we understand that it might take a while for service agreements to get in MMIS, but please talk with the provider because, like Erin said, we've gotten kind of frantic emails from providers saying we didn't have time to do all this, and we're not going to be able to bill because we don't meet the criteria for CFFS for the assessment, for the or their intake, and for the workers and all of those kinds of things. So make sure that you're having a conversation with the provider to just verify when they can start.
I wanted to go back to this slide as well. So I am seeing a comment in the chat. So I wanted to make sure that I resaid this, and then I'll add an additional part. So for goods and services, that it can, covered goods and services are those that can replace the need for human assistance. So they are replacing the need of having a staff person come into the home and work with the individual. Okay. It's a pretty limited group of things that can actually be approved. We wouldn't approve like, you know, some sensory items or sleeping bags or adaptive clothing, things like that. Okay. And the person can choose either model. So they can choose the agency model or the budget model. But I want to make clear, if they choose if they have covered goods and services in their plan, the FMS provider is the provider that is reimbursing or purchasing those goods for the person. So they can select the agency model, but then their goods and services are paid through the FMS provider. Okay, so they're going to be working with an FMS and an agency provider, but they're still using the agency model. They're not using the budget model. They can use the budget model, of course, and everything's through the FMS, but if they've chosen the agency model, the FMS is reimbursing for those goods.
And Erin, there are a couple related questions just about bids, and we aren't in CFFS because more than half our population does not have a case manager. We're not asking for bids to be done. There was a question about a family member's home. If the person's going to spend a lot of time in a family member's home, but it's not their primary residence, that would be allowed. Yes. So there's also a question about not thinking that home mods are allowed, and home mods are. We were mistaken on a couple of slides really early in this process, but it is allowed. And I think the caveat is that the person has to make sure that they have a support for their personal care when they're spending money on a home modification. So in that way, we expect probably most home modifications are going to be small because people will need their personal care.
I'm seeing a question regarding the FMS fees posted on the DHS website. So those fees were published, I think, in just January of this year. And if an FMS provider changes their fees, they need to notify DHS of that change. So if you're hearing from a provider that the fee is incorrect, please tell them to notify us, and then we will update the fees. So currently, those fees are the fees that those FMS providers have given to DHS to be published.
So there's a question about authorizations. And so the vast majority of payers, us and MCOs that we work with, do authorizations. I think there might be an MCO that doesn't do service agreements or authorizations. And so when we're talking about getting a service agreement before providing service, that's generally true, except in the one caveat, if one of the MCOs doesn't do authorizations, then that of course would not be true. But the vast majority of entities will be getting authorizations for services. There's a comment in about CFFS codes with modifiers for U9 or UB, and other CFFS services are not allowed on the same service agreement with a PCA, which is true. You can't. The only CFFS code you can put on a PCA agreement is consultation. That's the only one that's allowed. When people move into CFFS and are using CFFS personal care or any of the other pieces of CFFS, that needs to be, for type B, that needs to be on a different service agreement. I'm not sure where that came up in the slides, but yes, you can't put PCA and CFFS services other than consultation on the same type B agreement.
I'm seeing a question. I think the person's probably referring to the budget model, asking if paid time off and workers' comp, if they're required for the budget model on the service delivery plan, or if the worker can opt out of either. So on the budget worksheet on the service delivery plan, there are sections, or I should say more like buttons that the person or the provider is selecting of if PTO applies to that person and if workers' comp applies to that person. And so they'll just want to work with their FMS provider to determine if somebody can opt out of either of those. There was a request to reshare this slide. So this is what the lead agency needs to send the provider. So the MinChoices support plan, the supplemental summary charts, the service delivery plan, and the service agreement.
So Erin, I think maybe the clarification that we needed in chat was that this is going to like FMSs or agency providers, not to consultation.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think people need to go look at the manual page for MinChoices. There's a grid that tells you exactly which form goes to who. So if you have questions about any of the reports that are coming out of MinChoices, please look at their manual page.
Well, it looks like we're right at 12 o'clock, so we'll stop there. If you have any questions that you'd like to submit to us, go ahead and use that link that you've been using in the past to pre-submit your questions. Or if it's something more urgent, of course, you can email us at the CFFS email address on the bottom of the screen. And we will be back here in 2 weeks. So I don't have that date in front of me, but that first Friday of April. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Have a nice weekend.